Good day everyone, my name is Marian Liao from Group 3 and today we will be talking about Dr. Maria Luisa Caneso Doronila, the educational thinker assigned to our group. So to start with, let us know more about who is Maria Luisa Caneso Doronila. Many fondly called her Mom Malou. She was a respected educator and a literacy advocate. She started her journey as a professor at the College of Education in UP Diliman and later on earned her PhD in Philippine Studies at UP Asian Center. Her dissertation is actually focused on how public school children understood national identity, and the findings were so eye-opening that they pushed her to champion an advocacy which is promoting nationalist and scientific education in the country. Aside from that, all throughout her career, she held several important roles. Under the leadership of President Jose Abueva, she became the director of the Resource Learning Center at UP Diliman, where she worked on creating learning materials and training teachers across the Philippines. Then, during President Emil Javier's term in UP, she served as UP's Vice President for Public Affairs. According to one of her colleagues, Ma'am Dela Serna, Dr. Doronila wasn't just an academe or scholar. She was someone truly committed to social change. She was deeply involved in alternative education, especially during the martial law period. And according to Ma'am Dela Serna again, after her stint as a vice president of UP's Public Affairs, she actually went around the country to promote the literacy numeracy program and to advocate for integrating community-based and culturally sensitive approaches into education. So just by looking at her background, we can really say and see that Dr. Doronila was not only a passionate educator or a writer, but someone who truly lived out her advocacy for inclusive, meaningful education, especially for the marginalized. Dr. Doronila has written several important works. First is The Landscape of Literacy, published in 1996. This book actually earned an international recognition and was even awarded by the UNESCO. Here, Dr. Doronila takes a different approach. She steps outside the classroom and into the daily lives of the people in the marginalized communities. Through an ethnographic study, she explores how literacy is used in real, everyday situations and not just in schools. She shows that literacy isn't just something you gain in school, but in fact, people in rural areas use reading and writings in all sorts of functional ways. So based on Dr. Doronila's work, although we only highlighted two, she actually defined what community-based literacy really is. So according to her, this is the real-world ways people use reading and writings outside the formal school setting. This are the kinds of literacy practices that shaped by the needs of the community and their everyday lives. It wasn't just about reading books, passing the tests, the exams, but it was actually about communication and problem solving in real life context. So aside from that, Dr. Doronila also championed the idea of functional education. So this is an approach to learning that focuses on teaching skills people can actually use in their everyday lives. So according to her, instead of teaching for academic achievement, for exams, functional education aims to equip learners, especially the adults and the out-of-school youth, with the knowledge they need to navigate everyday situations. So she believed that education should empower people to function confidently and effectively in their own community, in their own environment. That's why she really pushed for education programs that reflect the real needs and scenarios. Education that is not just about the textbook, that is not just about the exams, the assessments, but about real life scenarios.
So now we'll move on to the key ideas of Doronila. In the interest of time, we'll only be discussing one of Doronila's works, and that's a research and development approach to the delivery of comprehensive functional education and literacy in the Philippines. Doronila says in this paper that we need to consider at least 7 aspects when we speak of community-based literacy and functional education programs. First is the nature of community life. Ang sinasabi lang ni Doronila dito ay walang one-size-fits-all approach to functional education. It should be localized and contextually relevant to the community. This also implies that local people and officials need to be involved in the planning process as early as the planning stage. In fact, Doronila's assessment showed that local people have the capability to do the baseline research needed to design their local literacy programs. So it's important not to undermine their expertise, especially when it comes to their own communities. Second is the extent of the literary practice within the community. If you remember our discussions on indigenous peoples, we know that some communities have oral traditions, while others have highly literate ones. Thus, Doronila says that literacy teaching should be integrated into community activities. In this way, they can increase both productivity as well as the participation of people in the literate practice. So one example she gave is with barangay projects like road building. 1 or 2 hours each week can be held for those employed to teach literacy and work skills, 2 birds with 1 stone. Third is the use of locally adapted and indigenous materials. Doronila says that literacy programs should start from what the community already knows, what knowledge they already have, and what practices they currently practice, especially indigenous and oral knowledge. So if we impose foreign literature and foreign knowledge systems, then all this will do is displace local traditions and later contribute to the lack of illiteracy, or perhaps even poverty. Ito nga naman ang sinasabi natin dati pa, importante ang localization sa curriculum. It's important also to use locally adapted and indigenous materials. So in summary of these first 3 points, community-based functional education must be 1. Participatory, and 2. Culturally relevant. The next 4 points then expand on these ideas a lot more. So fourth is the development of a literate tradition in the communities. Here, Doronila mentions a 1996 UNESCO study that there is no cognitive advantage for being literate over illiterate. In fact, cognitive development is influenced more by how deeply literacy is integrated into communities' daily life. So this just supports the idea of our first 3 points that literacy should be embedded into community life instead of just being taught in isolation. Fifth is the incorporation of livelihood and development components in literacy programs. Here, Doronila cites a 1983 study by DECS and her 1993 ethnographic study, which states that grades 3 to 5 dropouts forget their literacy skills due to 1. Lack of daily use, 2. Lack of reading materials, 3. Limited media access, and 4. No time for continued learning. So again, what we've been saying this whole time is that literacy alone isn't sustainable. It can only be retained when it's applied to the children's daily life, when it's integrated into community life. So application prevents regression. 6 is the use of the interagency approach. To make non-formal education sustainable, it should involve community participation and also interagency collaboration. Syempre, the community alone is not enough to fully implement all of these practices. It also needs the involvement of government agencies and collaboration. So yun nga, literacy and education must be owned and managed by communities with support from local governments. That's why it's important for them to recognize that organized community efforts are not threats to government, but are real steps towards building a better community. Lastly, her 7th point of consideration is a system of equivalency and accreditation and a new role for educators. I'll start with the system of equivalency and accreditation. Sinasabi dito ni Doronila na formal and non-formal education should be unified. And in doing that, they develop a system of functional literacy levels to assess where non-formal learners stand with formal grade levels. So, this system is level 1 is basic literacy, level 2 is equivalent to grade 4 for formal education, level 3 for non-formal education is equivalent to grade 6, and level 4 is equivalent to second year high school. So in all these developments of unifying formal and non-formal education, the ultimate goal is to create a school of the people, isang paralan ng sambayanan, where the entire community becomes a learning community. And with learning in the hands of the community, literacy teachers shall no longer be direct implementers of programs. Pero may silbi pa rin ang mga literacy teachers, which Doronila lists what their new roles should be. And it's to first train para-teachers, second, assist local executives in planning development programs where literacy and education are major components. Third is to help design and put in place the system of monitoring and evaluation. And fourth, design and put in place the system of equivalency. So you can see how literacy teachers are still important within this context, even if they are not the ones directly implementing the programs, to give way for the communities to do that themselves. So with this role of educators redefined, what we have now is community-led, inclusive education systems that integrates learning with social participation, reform, and empowerment. So this allows marginalized people to claim their place in society. And these are Doronila's 7 aspects of community-based literacy and functional education programs. You can see a summary of all the points here on the screen.
Now for the similar thinkers. Ang mga makabagong ideya ni Dr. Doronila sa functional education at literacy resonate deeply with influential thinkers katulad na lamang nila ni Paulo Freire, John Dewey, and Ivan Illich, emphasizing education as transformative, participatory, and contextually relevant tool for societal environment. Functional education and literacy as empowerment. Now, for Doronila, naviview niya ang literacy not just the ability to read and write, but as a powerful tool for developing critical consciousness and enabling societal transformation. At itong perspective na to ay nakalain kay Paulo Freire's philosophy, which frames education as a means of liberation and empowerment, particularly for marginalized community. Literacy, in this sense, becomes a vehicle for individuals to understand and challenge social realities, fostering active participation in community life. Sa integration of educational modalities naman, blending informal, formal, and non-formal education. Doronila advocates for integrating various educational approaches, informal, formal, and non-formal, to effectively address the diverse needs of communities. And this approach reflects John Dewey's philosophy of experiential learning, kung saan ang education ay kita as a continuous social process rooted in real-life experiences. And by combining these modalities, educational programs become more responsive and relevant, supporting both individual growth and collective empowerment. Now, for the community-based literacy programs naman, focus on practical skills and lifelong learning. So, for Doronila's emphasis on practical skills and lifelong learning in literacy programs mirrors Dewey's commitment to fostering active community engagement through education. Community-based literacy initiatives are designed to equip learners with skills that are directly applicable to their daily lives, promoting ongoing personal and societal development. And this approach naman ensures that education remains meaningful and transformative, empowering individuals to contribute actively to their communities. Now for the critique of institutionalized education. Dr. Donorila's critique for formal education systems ay naka-align kay Ivan Illich agreements in the schooling society, particularly in the context where colonial legacies disrupt the relevance of curricula to local realities. So si Illich criticizes institutionalized schooling for enforcing conformity, perpetuating social inequalities, and of course prioritizing credentialism over genuine learning. Now, for the last, not the least, is the shared vision across thinkers, relevance, participation, and transformation. Collectively, Doronila, Illich, Freire, and Dewey advocate for education that is relevant to learners' lived experiences, participatory in nature, and transformative for both individual and communities. They envision educational systems that foster critical thinking, creativity, and active engagement rather than passive consumption of information of hierarchical control. This shared vision underscored the importance of reimagining education as a tool for liberation and societal progress.
Dr. Maria Luisa Caneso Doronila's works, which focused on education as an activity which relies heavily on community participation and the localization of education, provides an opportunity for the exploration beyond mainstream education in applying a historical lens in analyzing educational systems and institutions at the grassroots level and applying lessons from previous discussions. Her work, which employs ethnographic methods, have proven substantial in understanding how education can be locally contextualized and decolonized. The tendency and nature of mainstream Filipino education is heavily influenced by historical events, particularly with how US colonization of the country influenced the structure and systems of mainstream Philippine education. So, Dr. Doronila's works try to deviate from studying these mainstream systems and opted to analyze the inner workings of community education and indigenous education. However, though her work has contributed substantially when it comes to establishing a more contextualized and culturally sensitive system of education, it can also be argued that her research is highly localized, which means it may not be proper or suitable when it comes to inferring knowledge regarding a bigger research locale. However, through addressing systematic gaps, I believe that Dr. Caneso Doronila's work could be key to starting an educational reform plan that provides the opportunity to build a more mass-oriented foundation for Philippine education. At the same time, we must analyze how her works hold up to a point in time where various developments in the system of education were rampant. As groundbreaking as her studies may have been, we must still study how her works reflect the current state of Philippine education at different levels and how we can apply her ethnographic studies to the current state of mainstream, community, and indigenous education.
Dornila's work highlights that high basic literacy rates in the Philippines don't necessarily lead to functional literacy or development unless skills are tied to daily life. Literacy, she argues, supports cognitive growth only when integrated into real social and economic activities, with community context being the most crucial factor. She critiques how colonial education disrupted indigenous knowledge systems and continues to alienate learners from their own culture. Government neglect of non-formal adult education has pushed NGOs and community groups to step in, while top-down technical approaches often fail to address deeper needs like critical thinking and social participation. Her approach is strong in its focus on community relevance, integration of local knowledge, and participatory methods, offering a holistic and historically grounded view of literacy. However, it faces limitations such as challenges in scaling, resource disparities among communities, complex interagency coordination, and resistance from traditional institutions. Sustainability also remains a concern, especially in marginalized areas. Dornila's work offers practical insights for addressing current educational concerns, especially for marginalized groups. She advocates for community-based, culturally relevant programs that value local knowledge and context. Her approach calls for participatory teacher training, curriculum development that includes indigenous knowledge and livelihood skills, and literacy programs rooted in everyday life. She also promotes bridging formal and non-formal education through equivalency systems and emphasizes lifelong learning as a shared community responsibility. Doronila explains that colonialism and social hierarchies have long influenced how marginalized learners and teachers are treated. In the past, those who didn't adopt colonial languages or systems were excluded. Today, formal education still favors English and Western knowledge, often ignoring local languages and community-based learning. As a result, many marginalized learners feel left out. Non-formal education, which could better serve them, is often overlooked. Likewise, teachers from the community or volunteer educations are often seen as less qualified than those formally trained, showing how inequality still exists in the education system. Doronila envisions education as a transformative, empowering, and decolonizing force by grounding it in local knowledge, languages, and community participation. She emphasizes the use of indigenous learning systems and mother tongue to counter colonial legacies and make education more accessible and meaningful. Empowerment comes when communities take ownership of their learning, connecting it to their real life needs, livelihoods, and social change. Education should encourage critical thinking and dialogue, challenging inequality and promoting justice. Lastly, she advocates for a school of the people where formal and non-formal learning merge and community voices shape the educational process. We hope that our presentation gave you a glimpse of how Doronila's work pushes for education that empowers, includes, and values community. Thank you!